O, okay. Ek weet julle dink ons voeter heeldag in die bos rond, maar eintlik het ek ook 'n day job. Ek gee klas by Inscape in argiteksitekeninge en binnehuisontwerp. Natuurlik is daar baie fokus op volhoubaarheid. Mense dink gewoonlik groen argitektuur is 'n Jojo tank wat jou reënwater vang, 'n songeyser en 'n paar sonpanele, wat alles wel baie bydra tot die volhoubaarheid van 'n gebou. Maar in die ontwerp self is daar ook 'n hele klomp goed wat mens kan doen. Michael Magner is een van ons voorlopers as dit kom by volhoubare argitektuur.
If one's got the luxury of designing a new home, then there are a lot of decisions that can be made to improve the building's sustainability.
Stap 1 is die rigting waarin jy 'n gebou neersit. Hier in die suidelike halfrond wil ons almal lekker winterson in die oggende in ons slaapkamer hê. Maar hoe maak jy met 'n groot kantoorblok waar almal 'n uitsig ook wil hê?
The challenge for a designer is to make maximum benefit of the north aspect, which is the warmer side of the house. It's the side where we can control the penetration of the sun from an ideal summer scenario, which is keep all the sun out, to a winter scenario, which is let a good quantity of sunshine in. So facing north helps with that, but the challenge is what do you do with the south? And every building has a south, unless you make it paper thin. So we do these tricks like put the toilets at the back or make the kitchen kind of south facing and stuff like that.
Die mens verstaan al vir duisende jare lank die bewegings van die son. Daar is 'n hele klomp voorbeelde van antieke strukture wat spesiaal so ontwerp is dat dit op een of ander stadium iets spesiaal met die sonlig doen. Soos Newgrange in Ierland wat selfs ouer as die piramides is. Die vensters is so geposisioneer dat die son vir die eerste keer op die eerste dag van die winter in die gebou inskyn. En selfs soos ons eie voortrekkermonument. Presies 12:00 die middag op die 16de Desember, dan skyn die son deur 'n klein slim gaatjie in die dak op baie gedenksteen daaronder. Dit is tyd vir ons om hierdie kennis van die son se beweging op nog 'n slimmer manier te begin gebruik.
The one thing that people I generally don't realize is how much movement there is in the sun, not between the morning and the evening, but between sunrise in the middle of summer and sunrise in the middle of winter. The reality of it is that the sun rises many degrees north of east in the middle of winter and many degrees south of east in the middle of summer. So there's a lot one can work with if one understands the movement of the sun to generate heat when you want it and to cut it out when you don't.
Die gebruik van skerms en blindings is 'n baie effektiewe manier om te beheer hoeveel sonlig in 'n gebou inkom. En met gesofistikeerde sagteware vandag kan mens presies sien waar en wanneer mens dit moet inlaat en watter tyd van die jaar mens moet begin om dit uit te blok. Die nuwe SANRAL hoofkantoor in Pretoria, wat Michael hulle ontwerp het, is 'n goeie voorbeeld.
On the SANRAL building that we recently did, we used a mesh, which is a woven steel product where it effectively becomes a louver. We're all familiar with louvers, but we see them at a larger scale where we can kind of, the blade is say 20 mils deep and sort of 3 mils thick, and we adjust the angle of that louver to let the sun in or let the sun through or keep it out. What we did with the mesh on the SANRAL building was to not to design it to move, but to use the screen as a micro louver, and then through modeling the building at different times of the year, we could predict the percentage of sun penetration through that material at different angles to the sun.
Sodat die skerm so geplaas, sodat die vriendelike son wat hulle wou inlaat, die skerm direk tref, en dan is in elk geval 50% daarvan uitgeblok. En die onvriendelike son sal dan die skerm teen 'n hoek tref, wat beteken dit word alles uitgeblok. So die vertikale plasing van die skerm beheer dan hoeveel son inkom tussen die oggend en die middag. In die oggend kom alles in en in die middag baie minder. En die horisontale plasing van die skerm is dan so dat dit die somerson uitblok en die winterson laat inkom.
And it's worked very well. We had modeled the idea to a certain extent before we installed it, so we were fairly confident in the idea. But the energy consumptions that we're experiencing in the building now, that the building is complete, has been better than what we predicted it as a modeled form. So this aspect is just the kind of first principles of, well, you get the facade right, you make the rest of the job inside the building that much easier. If you get the facade wrong, then you're fighting against nature for the rest of the project.
'n Gebou soos die kantore bestaan nie net uit glas en staal nie. Die keuse van boumateriale speel ook 'n baie belangrike rol in die selfvolhoubaarheid van so 'n gebou. Termomassa is 'n materiaal se vermoë om hitte te behou. So 'n sinkdak in die son sal verskriklik vinnig warm bak, terwyl beton, wat 'n baie hoë termomassa het, baie langer sal vat voordat dit warm word en ook baie langer vat voordat dit koel word. So gedurende die dag bly 'n gebou relatief koel en in die nag relatief warm. So effektief kan die ontwerp van die struktuur die temperatuur binne reguleer. Dit beteken jy het minder kunsmatige verhitting en verkoeling nodig wat op die lang termyn baie energie bespaar. Maar aan die ander kant van hierdie glyskaal is die materiaal se omgewingsimpak. Iets soos 'n sinkdak op houtbalke het 'n baie kleiner voetspoor as beton in die vervaardigingsproses daarvan. So hoe maak mense hierdie keuse?
Well, these are huge dilemmas at the moment. I think there's not enough maths, there's not enough research, and especially not in a South African context, to start to measure those things. So in Europe and the States, there is a fair amount of quantification that's being done on materials to help architects and other decision makers in the construction industry to choose a method of construction that has a positive or less negative impact on the environment. But you can't just take data that belongs to the States or belongs to Europe and assume the data will stack up the same way for South Africa or for any part of another part of the planet. So those kinds of exercises still have to be done. So our views on that are based on some generic principles to say, well, if this building is going to stand for a considerable length of time, then the decision to use concrete is more justified than if the project is kind of has a quick turnaround, say it's a spec office block and it only, the owner is planning to just kind of run it on the site for the next 15 years and then most likely the site will be converted to a railway line or some other problem down the line, then that would start to say, well, don't build in something that you have to demolish, build in something that you could disassemble.
Vir die gebou het hulle besluit op beton. Nie net omdat die gebou vir baie lank moet hou nie, maar ook vir sy ander eienskappe.
On the SANRAL project, we've used a concrete roof slab, which isn't very unusual, but what is a bit more unusual about it is that we exposed a high percentage of that roof space, the concrete of that roof, to the indoor office environment.
Met ander woorde, daar's nie oral plafonne in die gebou nie. Juist om die termomassa van die beton te gebruik om die temperatuur binne te help reguleer, in plaas daarvan om dit te mors tussen die dak en die plafon. Dit is ook groen om inheemse plante te plant. En hier's oral bome en plante en blomme, so dit voel nie regtig of jy in die stad is nie. En op die dak is daar 'n tuin, wat ook nie net sommer vir mooiheid is nie.
The whole roof is like a big planter box, and then in that planter box is a series of layers of obviously waterproofing and then water management and then potting soils, and then we've planted. And the reason for that is that layer, the planting with its earth is the insulation.
Maar die daktuin dien ook nie net as isolering nie.
It does a bunch of things. It protects the roof, that layer of planting, which it protects the waterproofing from the sun when waterproofing doesn't like sun. It also, in some instances, can be irrigated, and irrigation would then add a certain amount of evaporative cooling, which would further influence the thermal mass properties of the slab. And then, obviously, depending on what one plants on the roof and how big the roof is, but it actually we start to have a positive impact back on the environment because the roof is no longer like a heat sink. It's no longer a kind of man-made surface. It's almost like we've lifted the ground up and put it above the building. So we're planting it back and we're putting nature back in its place.
Die dak het selfs ook 'n positiewe effek tydens 'n groot donderstorm.
In a big thunderstorm, a big portion of that water is then seeping through the garden, and in fact the first rains won't even make it into the stormwater system, but if you do have a lot of rain and it does saturate that system, the water is held in that environment longer and then seeps through to the system, so it'll only enter the stormwater system half an hour, 40 minutes later than the water that ran off the roof straight away. So those kinds of things one doesn't think of as particularly green, but in fact they do improve the city's ability to manage their stormwater runoff more effectively.
Die plante op die dak en in die tuin rondom die gebou is inheems, want sê Michael, dit maak net meer sin.
To plant plants that come from another place on the planet that have evolved to cope with different weather patterns, different temperatures and different water quantities, starts to add to the liability of that area, because now we're watering this kind of super grow jungle plant, and the natural plants of that area can't compete with this jungle ivy that's being watered 4 times a week. And so that's why it's not considered appropriate to plant plants that are not from the region.
Om 'n ware volhoubare gebou te ontwerp, is dit natuurlik ook belangrik om te kyk na die binnekant van die gebou. Die afwerking, vloertipes en toebehore bied ook heelwat opsies.
Like SANRAL, we used a lot of bamboo, so there's virtually no hardwood timber in the building. We used bamboo for the floors, bamboo for the doors, bamboo for the door frames. Bamboo grows very quickly, so to harvest bamboo and use it as a building material is a very attractive option. And if it is being farmed sustainably, it's far more green as a product than our conventional timber flooring solutions. In fact, greener than most materials. It's a material that grows in a natural environment, it's extremely strong, extremely hard-wearing, and can be replaced very quickly. Carpets is another one which is quite attractive to consider if you want your building to be a bit greener. There are a few of the leading carpet companies around that use a very high percentage of recycled content. So then you're talking about a material that's going from cradle to cradle rather than cradle to grave, which is a very attractive idea in terms of green buildings and a more sustainable environment.
Die SANRAL gebou is op die oomblik een van ons land se beste voorbeelde van hoe 'n ware groen gebou moet lyk en werk. Daar is ander voorbeelde, maar nog heeltemal te min. En om regtig 'n verskil te maak, help dit nie om sulke geboue een vir een in isolasie te bou nie.
The bottom line is that we do need to start thinking about our cities as green organisms and as sustainable organisms. And I would say in South Africa we're way behind the curve. We're way behind achieving those goals. Our cities are far too spread out. Our legislation is kind of a conversion of 18th, 19th century English town planning modified to suit, versus conceptualized as a system of living and a system of using the planet in a way that is effective. We're nowhere, we spread everything out too much, we pay too much attention to the individual right and not the collective whole. If you put a group of, to make the analogy conceptual, if you put a bunch of rugby players on the field and said you can all play by your own rules because you've all got individual rights, you wouldn't have a very effective game of rugby. In a game of rugby, like any sport, we limit the rights that you have in order to play the game. And we agree on those rights in order to make the game work. And we need to start thinking much more in our society like that. We need to start agreeing on a set of rules that make the game more feasible, more attractive, and more sustainable.
Not for Karina. Karina, please can you come up here? In 2007 het die eerste regte stel reëls vir groenbou, die Green Star Ratings, in Suid-Afrika in werking getree. Dis 'n goeie begin, maar soos Michael sê, nie genoeg nie. So vir nou is my uitdaging om op kreatiewe maniere 'n volhoubare denkwyse by die volgende generasie ontwerpers te kweek.